So hello all, welcome everybody. Welcome back after the lunch break, if you really did it. And welcome at iMEdD if you just arrived. I am Kiki. I belong to the iMEdD team. I work with data, and I'm here to moderate, to facilitate the discussion about artificial intelligence and journalism. So let me address to whoever watches us through the live streaming service for a second, just to remind that you can choose the Greek edition of the website if you wish to follow the conversation in Greek, or you can choose the English edition of the website if you want to follow the conversation in English. So I have 4 incredible speakers with me, all experts on artificial intelligence and journalism. And starting up from the left side, I would like to introduce Nikolaos Mavridis to you. He's director and founder of the Interactive Robots Media Lab. He has all the technological background we need, and he will explain everything we need to know about how AI techniques work and bring things to journalism. Next to me, he's Łukasz Król. He's a technology and digital security researcher working with the College of Europe. So welcome, Nikos and Łukasz. It's so nice you're here today. Ruth Kühn is also next to me. Ruth comes from the Technology Management Projects and Development Department at Deutsche Welle. So Ruth has been building up the technology management at Deutsche Welle, and she's here to point out on how newsrooms and journalists already use AI in their real life office work, right?
I try to.
Okay, welcome. And last but not least, Mattia Peretti. Mattia is the manager of the project Journalism AI at the Polis media think tank of LSE. Welcome, Mattia.
Thank you.
So I would suggest, just as a warm-up, let's begin with some definitions. And I will start with Nikos. So, Nikos, what is AI? Is it a buzzword or is it a real thing?
Okay, let me just do a small completion of the very nice introductions that you did just for the sake of the audience. So I originally did my PhD at MIT at the Media Lab. And the Media Lab is the place that Nicolas Negroponte together with Jerome Wisner originally started. Wisner was a science advisor to Kennedy. Then it was a place where the original convergence between telecommunications, computation, and media happened, in a sense. So you could see some things that we called multimedia in the demo versions in the 80s in the Media Lab, much before, even the World Wide Web existed. My personal involvement with such technologies is through the fact that my PhD had to do with artificial intelligence. I have some publications as part of my publication records in things that are related to journalism and AI. There is one paper actually on the Obamacare campaign and a Twitter space analysis of the campaign. But I also give quite a number of talks beyond my academic and consulting work on more wider topics around artificial intelligence, so things that have to do with the socioeconomic context, things that have to do with the jobs of the future. I did a talk for the economists and so on, and I usually give talks to a number of different sessions. I do the TEDx's, I've been to the Council of Europe, I do Singularity University talks, and so on. Now, let me start though with AI, beyond this introduction. So arguably, I would say that AI starts with Aristotle. And it's not just me that says it. Even in classic AI textbooks, you'll hear that the idea that part of human thinking could become formalized and thus mechanized is pretty much there in the syllogisms, in the Nicomachean ethics, and something like that. But practically, as a field, it starts in the 60s. Alan Turing was one of the main people to first use the term artificial intelligence, and his definition back then of something that possesses artificial intelligence is a machine that you cannot discriminate by communicating with it if it is a human or not. But then slowly the field became much more practical. There's a number of key figures. There's Marvin Minsky, who was also at the Media Lab where I was. There's Norbert Wiener, that was my academic great-great-grandfather in a sense. But the main thing, usually in terms of definitions, is that a machine that possesses AI is able to either fool you or actually show that it thinks or acts humanly or rationally. And these are 4 different things: to be thinking seemingly humanly, to be acting seemingly humanly, to be thinking rationally, whatever rational decision-making means, and to be acting rationally. Now, in practice, we have a lot of different fields nowadays. We have natural language processing, we have computer vision, we have machine learning as one of the fields of AI, and a number more. And recently, we have also entered this deep learning revolution, as it's called, pretty much from 2011, 2012. The funny thing with deep learning has to do with the fact that slowly applications that we wouldn't believe would be practically realizable started to quickly become realizable. But deep learning depends very much on massive amounts of data, and the right kinds of data in most cases, and big computational power. And through this change, this also means that there exist big changes in the, if you want, techno-geopolitics of things at the level of companies, at the level of nations and so on. Who possesses the right data or the right power? How does the right data and the right computational power end up in the right hands, and so on? It's not so much a matter of know-how. And of course, together with AI and all the more mathematical and engineering background, there's many practical questions that are out there. Many of them have to do with ethics. Not only ethics of the application of the technologies, but also the question of how human ethics, descriptive ethics, change when you insert these technologies in our societies, and the question of whether machines on their own could have rational decision-making on the basis of moral systems, could do moral reasoning in a sense. And there's many other questions, for example, biases. So if we train these machines, especially the ones that are using machine learning, we train them with data that we mine from humans in most cases. It might be the opinions of humans as they are expressed on the web. This means that in many cases they will be carrying biases that exist as societal biases unless we do something special about it. Or not only by inheriting them from the humans, but through their construction, they might be having other types of biases. So before starting to apply these technologies in different parts of our organizations, it's very important to ask some basic questions regarding what we want to achieve, what they're really achieving, and what will be the effect of introducing them. And one final thing before I close, people ask about AI and humans. The question is not AI or humans. AI is and will be together with humans. It will actually create better units with collective intelligence that contain humans and machines. But in practice, again, whenever we apply AI, we have the questions that have to do with whether we're replacing humans or augmenting them, and in what way do we actually make it part of our workflows. That's it.
If I don't know anything and I ask you what is the difference between machine learning and AI in general, what would you tell me?
So in the case of machine learning, you have an AI system that usually learns on the basis of a training set that we give it. And this training set might be supervised or unsupervised, so it might be annotated or not annotated. Let me give you an example. I want to make a machine that learns how to recognize, to discriminate between apples and bananas in a production line, right? For fruit production. If I show to the machine 1,000 pictures of apples and 1,000 pictures of bananas, this is a training set. Now, if I furthermore tell it that these pictures are apples and these are bananas, then this is a labeled training set, so we have supervised learning. But the difficulty is not learning the training set. If you have told to the machine that this is an apple and this is a banana for two specific things, the machine, of course, will remember the answer. The difficulty is how you generalize, how you're able to go from the 1,000 examples that you've seen to a much wider set of unseen samples of the underlying category.
Here is the right point, I guess, to ask Lucas to define bias. So how about if I want to separate apples from bananas and I say everything as apples and I say the system, everything is apples, predict the following, what I'm doing. Nikos, can Lucas Use your microphone.
Thanks so much. Okay, so we could either do a deep theoretical introduction into AI bias, or I could tell you about a really fun party trick that will make you either hit and or kicked out of every cocktail party in existence. So, there are some languages that are gender-neutral languages, right? So there is no he or she in those languages. One of those languages, they include Georgian, Turkish, and I believe Finnish. So what you can do as a really interesting trick is go to Google Translate and type in something like "she is the CEO" in Google Translate, translate it into Georgian, and then translate it back into English. It will say "he is the CEO." Because there's no he and she distinction, so essentially the system had to kind of guess and infer, okay? Now, before I badmouth machines too much and get killed in a robot revolution, I just want to tell you that humans are pretty bad at this too, right? Essentially, sort of, human translators will often grapple with all of those weird things and will have to guess a lot based on the context. If they are translating from a gender-neutral language like Georgian to a gendered one like English. But what's interesting is that sort of humans have the capacity to sort of be like, this data doesn't look right, which machines reflect the data that we feed into them. So we as human beings, we generate lots of bad data. We are racist, we are sexist, we are discriminatory, we have data that more reflects the rich and the West rather than the poor and the South. And the problem is that we feed all of this data into machines, and machines learn this data based on, machines essentially have a tendency to reproduce the world we've created, rather than create a new world. Humans have an ethics instinct. Humans can sort of look at data and be like, that's not ideal. With machines, it's a little more complicated. So that's like the basis of AI bias. Now, the most difficult thing about AI bias is that there isn't really a mathematical measure for bias, right? Sociologists haven't really come up, and there have been some attempts, and we can definitely debate this as well. Like there have been some attempts to, for example, say, I don't know, our society is plus 2 points to bias, so let's correct this in the algorithm. But there have been lots and lots of flaws within the system as well. So there isn't really a way of mathematically capturing social bias. There are ways of sort of mathematically capturing sort of bias within data, but there aren't ways of capturing a bias within a society in a way that would prove it, in a way that would be essentially satisfying. So essentially, machines and the algorithms reflect the data that we give it, and the data reflects the world we have, not the world we want.
And speaking about quality of data, Ruth, I want to ask you, what is data processing? How would you define data processing and metadata processing for our audience?
I think I wouldn't like to define it, but I want to say that this makes me really breathless if I listen to all this and all these definitions, and it makes me somewhat helpless because I think, oh God, that's a huge topic. How can we deal with it? And I really, really want to cut it into little pieces that we can handle. I think we can't handle this really big AI thing like this. We have to break it down and then talk about little pieces that we can handle. And maybe data processing is too big also, but seen from the point of a broadcaster, what data do I have to handle with? I have videos, I have audios, I have text. And as a company that has to deal with minimum 30 languages, I want to transcribe the data into one language I understand, right? We come to that later, I think, and go deeper into this. And then I want to translate it. And then I want to get some metadata out of it that journalists don't want to give to those things. Like I say, they don't like it to write keywords and all that. I think you all know that, but maybe we can have these data extraction. And maybe we can then talk of summaries and other things more.
So, Mattia, if people in newsrooms use data processing and metadata processing so as to handle data and produce content, then this content has to be delivered to the audience. And sometimes AI is there for distribution as well. So tell me about recommendation systems.
I think I got the easiest one on the stage. So again, I'm lucky because you're all familiar with the recommendation engines, even if you don't know it. It's what powers Facebook, it's what powers Netflix, it's what powers LinkedIn. Facebook will tell you, you might know these people, you want to be friend with them. Or Netflix makes a playlist for you and tells you, these things might be interesting for you. Or LinkedIn might suggest you there are these jobs that you want to apply for. So a recommendation engine is a system that suggests you a product, a service, or information based on analysis of data. And we could go deeper in this, but just to make a simple distinction, this could happen with your own data in a way. So meaning starting from your analysis of something, your consumption of news, for example, telling you if you have read this article, you might be interested in this one as well. Or it could be also like collaborative filtering, I think it's called, which means that you are taken as a persona, if you want, and another user that has similar inclinations to you will be taken as an opportunity to suggest you things that might not be suggested by your own data. Meaning, if I don't know, if I watch a documentary about Bill Gates and I watch a specific movie about the history of England, and there is another person who is watching kind of the same things, and then this person has watched a football documentary, that football documentary will be suggested to me by Netflix because Netflix assumes, infers, that we have similar tastes, and therefore there is a likelihood that I will be enjoying that football documentary. So that's why, in a way, AI powers many things you're all familiar with on a daily basis, I would say.
Yeah, so if we would like to move on our major section of our discussion, how AI is used in content production, and because Mattia, you said earlier, I took the easiest, probably you will take the most difficult now, because as a journalist working with data, I will start with this. How AI can be used as part of an investigation and how it can contribute to journalists' findings that they are finally their stories or they prove their stories.
I think that's still easy, so I'm still lucky. But anyways, well, I'm going to answer this question not from my personal experience. I'm not an investigator nor a data journalist, but I managed this project at the LSE that Kelly mentioned at the beginning. And last year we surveyed news organizations all over the world to ask them what they're doing with AI. So what I'm going to say is the findings that we got from that survey. And thinking of investigations, for example, so the entire news gathering space, journalists can use AI and specific machine learning to solve problems that they have in trying mostly to analyze data and take away patterns from data. Think about when a big investigation like the Panama Papers is made, or the most recent Luanda leaks by the ICIJ as well. It's very hard for human journalists to go through terabytes of data they receive. Machine learning can help them analyze the data in an automatic way so that they can extract information that then is flagged to the journalist to go to look at that specific piece of information in the leak to try to find out if there is a breaking news there, if there is a pattern, if there is a story. So that's kind of one of the most obvious way, if you want, that the machine learning is helping journalists. In the news gathering space, we can go much deeper than that. Social media can be scraped to find information. Quartz, which you might know from the US, they do great work on AI, and they have this interesting framework of explaining what machine learning can do for journalists, telling you how do you feel when machine learning can help. So when you have the feeling, I will never be able to go through all this data, machine learning can help there. I will never be able to check all these images that have been sent to find out patterns in the image. Machine learning can help you do that. Or even a fun experiment that they did, I think, they trained a model to get information when there is a helicopter flying over New York. Every time the visual images that they gather and a machine learning analyzes the images and will flag to a journalist the information that there is a helicopter flying around in circles around that specific area. Why this is relevant? Because most of the time in a big city like New York, London, or even Athens, if there is an helicopter circling around a certain area, something is happening there. So as a journalist, you want to know. So machine learning helps the journalist to receive a notification on their Slack channel, I think they use, and telling them there is a helicopter flying there. You might want to check what's going on. So these are the things that machine learning can help journalists do.
Ruth, what is the experience you have at Deutsche Welle or elsewhere? I mean, apart from news gathering and handling content, what is the AI role in discovering stories?
I would say it is exactly like it told us. And I would just concentrate on an add-on, like saying you can go through multi-languages now, because you couldn't do that before, actually. You couldn't translate all this stuff, but nowadays you can monitor all the different languages nearly on the world, and to get a clue what's going on, it's okay if it's only 70%, because it's not better than 70%. But you get a clue, and then you can manually dive deep into the thing. And that's what brings us to say it's an assistive thing, AI. It's nothing that is something valid, worth, so near you, something that can exist without you, but it is something that can really just help you to do the work you have to do.
I think Nikos has something to add here. You can take that.
Oh, perfect. I totally agree with you. So the basic idea is how can we augment human teams with the right kinds of supporting technologies? And in the end, the effectiveness with which these technologies become part of the workflows and the way that they empower humans is what really counts in many ways. A couple of other comments. One introductory probably that you will go to, very, very short. So beyond the usage of AI when it comes to being able to do investigations and to gather, if you want, the right kinds of elements for news, or just to get some basic focus of attention for where interesting things might be happening, there's a lot of other uses in journalism, right? There's stuff that has to do with helping with the automated or semi-automated composition of material. There's stuff that has to do with fact-checking and much more. But I guess this will be the continuation of the discussion, right?
Yeah, let's keep the route in journalism labor work for now.
Then two small comments on things that were just said. So number one, regarding recommendation systems. You're absolutely right. This is pretty much what they are. But the interesting thing to notice, which in a way very graphically Noah Harari had also turned into words, is the fact that it's not just the things that you buy that get recommended by the systems. In many cases, it's the people that you do business with, it's the people that you relate with, and so on. So the effect that recommendation systems are starting to have in our lives is tremendous. They're reorganizing our basic networks in many ways. And there is one of the big questions that comes with them is the one of algorithmic transparency. Yes, of course, when I teach recommender systems, then there's 5 algorithms, right, that we talk about, and you can see on the basis of which attributes they're actually creating the decision. But are you sure about the recommender system that decides what is the next news item that will come on your Facebook page is? Do you know on the basis of which principles it operates? Has Facebook ever announced that in any way? So there's a big question regarding such systems when you start to realize their power in reorganizing not only our thoughts and our beliefs, but also our societies, about how much we know regarding their internals and how much is published.
I think Lucas will have a saying here for sure. I mean, okay, we have planned to touch this hot topic of recommendations, of networks of homophily, bias, and how similar we are to each other. But I feel like I have to speed up to this. So, yeah, Lucas, what do you think? Do the systems know what I'm really interested in?
I mean, so first of all, the question is, whose interests do those systems represent, right? Because if we, for example, look at Facebook, this amazing internet sociologist, Zeynep Tufekci, totally look her up, and she was writing a lot about the architecture of Facebook. And Facebook has a very ad-friendly architecture, okay? Do you remember how before we had Facebook reactions, like the sad, angry, laughing, wow, etc., we had reactions that were, like there were lots of calls to create a dislike button on Facebook, right? Why was there not a dislike button on Facebook? Because people could dislike ads. Like that's one of the main arguments by Zeynep Tufekci. And even now, sort of, on Facebook, like and love are on the very left. We read from left to right. Our first intuition is to highlight a happy reaction, okay? Essentially, Facebook has sort of created a space that's super advertiser friendly, right? So Facebook has all those rules and moderation, what you can and cannot keep on the site. Once again, like you cannot, for example, show images of strong violence, or police violence images are very quickly removed. All of those things could be very, very good for the media ecosystem. Advertisers probably do not want to have their ads shown next to those pictures. So I think that the first thing we need to realize is that when we swim in the sea of recommendation engines, we are not sort of the main customer, advertisers are. And essentially, we are literally giving our whole information infrastructure, our whole journalism news infrastructure to a platform that's funded by advertiser money. Sure, advertiser money was funding platforms in the past as well. It's never been as big of a proportion of profits. It's never been as powerful as it has been now. I mean, it's always affected the architecture. So like in Poland, there's this big glossy magazine that's become super popular. It was an add-on to a newspaper. And one of the reasons why they started a big glossy one is because advertisers were calling up the newspaper and being like, hey, we want color ads and we'll pay you lots of extra money for color ads. So they ended up doing like a big special edition of the newspaper once a week where they put up pictures and everything. So like, advertising was always responsible for architectural decisions. It's never been as responsible for content recommendation, liking, sharing systems, etc. as it is now. So we need to be super, super wary of this.
Ruth, since Lucas point out the social media role here, I want to ask you, how do you feel about the fact that media organizations distribute their content through channels and platforms that use algorithms that media organizations don't know how they really work?
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a bit, in Deutsch we call it a Trickmühle. So it's eine Zwickmühle, and it's very tricky that it is. So the social media platforms, they provide users, and we need users that they can get our content easily. So we will provide our content on these platforms too, but we will have to strengthen our own platforms too. And that's why we need deeply to understand those mechanisms and make them work for us. So we can't deal with the whole story at once, but there are two things that really drives us. One, it changed workflows in our company, because that is really important, that if you deal with these things, you have to change the organization, actually. You have to make sure that editorial staff, that researchers, that technicians, that data scientists, and I think that's a separate species, actually, and that sort of lab, that this works together. Otherwise, you won't gain experience, and you have to work like in an experience-gaining way to understand it and then make it real. So we try, as Deutsche Welle, we try to understand those things and then try to take those things we think we need at the moment, and that is transcription of videos, so that we can increase the number of content we produce. We have one video in English, let's say, and we want to transcribe it and then translate it in all the languages we have. And we even want to be better in the market and go for dialects, right? So that can increase the amount of content we can, we can publish, I think that is the thing that drives us most at the moment. Was that the right answer?
What else are you doing at Deutsche Welle in terms of AI use for your content production and?
Good. We use transcription machines. We use transcribing. We use automatic subtitling. We use voice over. And we try to use things like face recognition and entity recognition, but for the background work, to get better metadata for our archives. And what we don't do is, we don't publish automatic generated things on our page. Because actually we don't yet really know how we can deal with the topic of transparency. That is a very, very, very big topic.
Yeah, I think Mattia wants to say something.
No, I just wanted to follow up on this because I think the potential for AI to leverage the archives that all media organizations have and the content they have produced for decades is immense. In terms of creating context, mostly, like entity extraction allows not just the recommendation system to suggest you over articles of different things, but also to help you add context to that piece of news you are reading. Because that story that you're reading about a specific topic, that topic might have been in the news already 5 years before, and it's important for you to know that it's not the first time this is happening. It adds context to your information. And not just for the audience, but even more for the journalist. I think that's extremely important. Why do we have to write the same piece again if a machine is able to tell us, hey, 5 years ago we have touched this topic already, so you might want to write the article in the frame of how the topic is evoluting rather than writing the same piece all over again without realizing the power of the archives you have already. So that's a part that I think makes me very excited about the potential of AI.
And Mattia, I would also like to know more about the personalization stuff. I mean, AI is there to meet the end user's expectations in terms of what we deliver on our homepage, for example, for whom and when, right?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion to have, and probably Lucas has more to tell about that. What does it mean? Who do we serve there? Like, are we serving the interest of the audience? What's the role of the journalist? To give the audience what they want or what we think is important for them to see, and how we strike the balance between the two things, because it's obviously not black and white. Personalization has great value in helping, on one side, deliver better content. We need to define what better means. But we can get better at that by giving to the audience the information that it's more important for them to get informed about a certain topic. And at the same time, it's also very important on the business side of journalism, because as you do that, as you better serve your audience, you increase the likelihood of the single user to maybe to subscribe to your content, to maybe pay for your content if a media organization has that kind of model. And there are extremely successful examples already happening. Like the New York Times just released their data yesterday about the increase in subscriptions. That's also because their personalization engine is top-notch in the journalism industry. But I think an important point is that you don't need to be the New York Times and have their resources to do that, because there are many media organizations here in Europe that are smartly doing the same thing.
How does personalization change the role of the front page editor?
Oh gosh, are there any front page editors in the room? Because I think you're not going to have a job very soon.
Sorry for that.
To be honest. First of all, another interesting discussion could be how many of us actually still go to the front page and what's the role of the front page in a personalized news ecosystem. More and more, the homepage of a website that I see, if Ruth goes to the same website at the same time, she will see different things. So the front page editor has less and less the role of deciding what information you should see, but at the same time, it's much more exciting the possibility to improve the kind of content that you, Kelly, want and that Lucas want, rather than the one-size-fits-all model that we always have to deal with.
Yeah, sure.
Hey. So very quickly on the front page stuff. No, that's super interesting. I was. So have you maybe ever clicked on it? Like BuzzFeed does this a lot, okay? Have you ever seen a link for BuzzFeed on like your Twitter timeline or your Facebook timeline, and you click it, and the headline on Facebook and the headline in the actual article are different? No? Nobody's nodding? Nobody's nodding? I hate this moment. But yeah, it happens. So for example, the headlines are auto-selected, and so are the images. One of the first groups that did this was the Washington Post. They did a system called Bandito, I believe, which actually has a list of headlines and a list of cover images, and almost like picks the headlines and the images to the reader and figures out, based on, I don't know, like the social network or the reader's background, what makes them the most likely to click, okay? And I think that this can go into one of two directions. So I'm very much a techie at heart, so I'm very excited. Yay! Computer-generated headlines, this is so cool. But I did once talk about this at a meeting and ended up having a long conversation with a journalist who felt very depressed by the prospect. And she was telling me, yeah, but will this not just lead to a degeneration of clickbait? Will this not just lead to sort of junk food journalism, the lowest common denominator being powerful? And I think that this is actually where the role of human editors becomes so powerful. I think that the role of human editors is figuring out to what extent do we both leverage the power of AI to, for example, deliver a custom article, deliver a custom headline, deliver a custom image, and sometimes even a custom article length. So we could, for example, prepare 3 versions, one for a very interested person, one for a moderately interested person, and one for somebody who's never heard of the topic. And essentially, I think that it's the responsibility of the editor to figure out how can we actually make sure that this technology isn't used to create junk food journalism, where everything is dissolved into consumable chunks that are forgotten. To what extent are we actually using this technology to make people aware of abuse of power, of conflict, of the issues happening around the world? So I think that this is actually where the human responsibility really goes in. We have the tools, we just need to have really, really conscientious and smart editors to make sure that they're used properly.
Can I just have a word on this too? Because I want to strengthen this actually. We need the editors, and I can't see actually why we should do that completely automatic. Why don't we have different fields in a content management system and the editors can fill in the headlines they can go with? So that would be nice too. So we don't have, I think if we use machines, we will have to build systems in the background for our work to show us what the machine does. We can't let the machine just do it and then not understand what the machine does.
Nikos?
Actually, I think that anyway, in most cases, somebody will have given the approval for something to be published, yes. Right? Generally now you have this whole issue regarding, legal responsibility and also attribution of the effects of an action to its causes and so on, and there's a big discussion, but here is much more practical, I think. The big question is incentivization. So what would really incentivize the editor to take such a decision would be beneficial for the common good versus a much more, if you want, a short-sighted decision that would maximize the survivability or the income of the specific medium while potentially creating many problems through the propagation of such news. And there's many other dimensions of journalism. I mean, journalism is very, very much connected, I think, at least to part of the world, to democracy and citizenship. So the wrong kinds of information, the wrong kinds of beliefs can have devastating effects in the end, and the role of journalists is not one that should be taken extremely lightly or in a very short-sighted way. Number two, what I found through my consultations, for example, at one point we went to a client that was a big oil company somewhere in the world, I don't want to be more specific, and they wanted us to create a system that would do oil price predictions in the short term, in the long term, with different margins of going up and down and so on. So usually for such systems, a big part of the input is social media or other news gathering sources, through which you can find the right kinds of keywords that would correlate to events that will get the price to go up or down and so on. But the funny thing is that it doesn't only go that way. It's not only news that changes the prices, and actually price that can create very big effects at a global scale, right? It's also the fact that slowly governments have started to play with this and to propagate the right kinds of believable stories in order to play their economic gains. And also there's another issue coming here. It has to do with a psychological profile of the readers. I mean, if we get our readers used to a lot of fakeness, in the end they will not believe anything. They will not even believe truth. And this creates an even bigger problem. So I guess that a big part of the basis of our discussion is how can AI help, not towards necessarily just throwing away some work that was just mundane human work or getting more sales. How can AI help towards creating a better world in which I think it's a prerequisite to have at least some preservation of truth?
You mentioned fakeness, and I would like to ask, do you think that AI can help us in the fight against misinformation, or do you think that AI can help out in terms of fact-checking?
Just in terms of my personal experience, again, not that I've done any of this, but the answer is yes, meaning that there are like fact-checking institutions whose work is now easier and more powerful thanks to AI tools that help them do their work better. Not something completely new, just it improves and augments their capacity. And in a way, most of the technologies that allow that misinformation to happen are the same technologies that will allow us to counter them. I'm thinking of the example of deepfakes. We were talking about this before, like this morning. Some newsrooms, the more forward-thinking ones, have started teaching their social media teams how to make a deepfake. Why? Not to spread misinformation, but because the moment you learn how something like that is done, it's much easier for you to counter that and to recognize one as that, and so to be able to better serve your audience by flagging what is a deepfake or not. So, in short, the answer is clearly yes.
So would you, Nikos or Lucas, add something about deepfakes and what journalism has to pay attention to there?
One very small comment, 10, 20 seconds. Number one, there's exactly what you said. There's measures and countermeasures. You create good deepfakes using AI. You create believable fake news using AI. You create believable fake profiles in Facebook and with trollbots underneath them using AI. But at the same time, you can detect them using AI. So in a sense, it's partially also a question of know-how and power superiority at the level of being able to have the know-how and the resources to do such things.
What do you think, Lucas?
Okay, so actually, a couple of quick things about deepfakes, because I've got opinions on that. No, just kidding. So I think that one of the big risks with deepfakes is we tend to think that what's the big deal? It's going to be verified, etc., etc. Whereas actually deepfakes, they call out to something very, very deep within us. Humans are incredibly visual people, creatures. Humans are people. Humans are very visual creatures. And essentially, when we do see something that we find offensive or horrible or weird, our brains instantly jump towards being disgusted, fearful, or something like this. This essentially means that a deep fake, once it's seen, is very, very difficult to unsee. Once we've actually, so it's not actually it's not that deep fakes will be difficult to debunk. I think that they will always be quite easy to debunk. It's more of the problem that once a deep fake has reached us, it sort of planted a virus in our brain that's gone in there so deeply that debunking it is almost impossible. So I think that this will be a much, much, much bigger problem right now.
A very, very small comment. I totally agree with you, but then we're getting into a slightly different area. So there's deepfakes as visual deepfakes, there's fake news, there's fake profiles, there's many variations of fakeness. You're right regarding the fact that even if you become aware that something that you saw is fake, it will have a subtle psychological effect on you. And with the right proportions for the right kinds of masses, it will actually bias your preconceptions about things. And this has a very big effect. But then slowly we're getting to things that are somehow, if you want, connected to, I mean, there's a classic Facebook emotional manipulation scandal from like 4 or 5 years ago, right? And so on. So this is, I think, quite a dangerous area that has started to be explored, and with lack of knowledge from the masses regarding what is the extent of the real sort of incidents of such things as compared to, you know, conspiracy theories versus a total lack of knowledge.
Can I go back in our conversation? Ruth, you mentioned transparency. and you said that you don't use automatically generated content till now for a couple of reasons and because of transparency thoughts as well. Would you like to elaborate on that?
So yeah, it's very important that we don't use it to communicate with our audience. We use it for internal research. We use it as an assistant system to let us do our things better or more of what is good. We started discussing what we have to do to deliver to our audience in case of transparency. So we have to say which algorithm do we use, and I think we have to make clear why do we use it. We have to encourage the users to ask us questions upon it, and that is maybe a really big issue for companies, because we can't handle commentaries, right? So I have the impression that all the people are asking us on our algorithms. That would be a complete disaster, actually.
Well, again, there's a technical term that's called explainability in AI, which exactly deals with what you're talking about. So when you apply AI, especially in government systems, right, where you need to be accountable to your citizens, then if, for example, a specific system decides to give a loan to somebody and not to give a loan to somebody else, you need to be able to explain in human terms under what logical rules this decision was taken. But when it comes to a big part of what exists within social media, I mean, there is no requirement yet for that, and there is not enough, I guess, pressure from the people towards something of that sort. Of course, there's questions regarding how much you can really explain or how satisfactory your explanation would be, but there are things in that direction. I mean, Facebook has started opening up the private data that it collects from people, and also has started opening up which are the other sources that it uses to get data for its recommendation systems outside its own platform, right?
So before opening up the conversation in a Q&A session, I would like to ask about how a local industry can adapt AI. I mean, if a media organization doesn't have the resources they need in order to adapt AI nowadays, what are the requirements both from a publisher's point of view, and I'm speaking about investment, and from a journalist skill set point of view? Mattia?
I wish there was an easy answer to that. Of course, there is not. I think it depends what's the goals. Like, we have heard in our research that luckily most organizations, when they approach AI, they do it while thinking first of why they're doing it. So what's the reason? What do you actually want to achieve? Because I think journalism has been burned by just jumping on the new technology because it's the new shiny thing without actually asking why. We have all heard about a pivot to video, which happens every 2 years. And then we move away from that and we jump on VR because it's the next cool thing. And then we leave VR because it doesn't allow us to do much. So with AI, the why question is the most important. And once that one is defined, there are actually resources that are readily available in terms of open source content, or also like the big platforms that are putting out there that journalists can easily use. Like, disclaimer, my research is funded by the Google News Initiative, but there are some Google Cloud tools that are free to use for anybody that allow you to do pretty good work with machine learning when it comes to analyzing, for example, text for entity extraction or images and so on. Or there are platforms like FastAI in the US, which provide open source tools and courses for you to learn to code and to use simple AI that anybody can use. So it's more, I think, at the moment, a problem of skill sets, So newsrooms are realizing more and more that they need to invest in training to allow the people already in the newsroom to get the knowledge and the skills they need to leverage AI. And at the same time, try to find ways to attract the talent that they need. Like a newsroom nowadays is not made of journalists only. Luckily, more and more there are data scientists in the newsroom, there are developers, there are designers. Journalism need those profiles more and more. Of course, that's a big challenge because a data scientist will get much more money and recognition by going to work for Google or for Amazon than for a news organization. So that is a challenge that journalism is grappling with.
I feel that Ruth totally agrees with you. So I would like to ask you, how do you feel about the fact that journalists and media organizations need to learn collaborating with people from different professional backgrounds, or even with tech companies? I don't know, that's a question.
I strongly believe we can only do these things in a good way if we collaborate. I think I already said it before. I think we have, in the companies themselves, we have to change our workflows, and we have to change our mechanisms, how we work together, and we have to stick to that we want to learn together, and then do the right things for our audience. And as a company, as a media company, I would say we should try to learn from the companies on the market, from startups, from young or old people that really burn for this. But in Europe, that is not easy. We can't just go on the market and buy. We have to do tenders, which is extremely hopeless, actually. So it brings transparency on the market, and it gives chances for every company. But, yeah, okay. But, yeah, it makes things difficult.
I think we already have some questions. Did I see right? Did I see a hand over there or not? Okay. So, do we have any questions? Yes.
It's just some things I want to ask clarifications because I don't know them. Like, for example, I did not understand when you said you can go through multi-languages. What does that mean? What can you do, in fact, with the AI? And also, sorry, about computer-generated headlines. I didn't get that too. I mean, how does that work, please?
Okay, so I take the first, and someone else takes the second. The first, what I meant was, we have a lot of languages that we don't understand. So I can only really speak one language, a bit of English. I can understand French, but doing research in 30 or 40 or 50 languages is possible today because you can throw your content into a machine and it will, if it is a video, it will be transcribed and then translated in a language that you understand.
You mean like Google Translate?
Yes.
Sort of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The same amount of translation preciseness?
Yes.
More or less? Okay.
More or less.
Okay.
Or even less.
Oh, okay.
So how about the computer-generated headlines? Who wants to ask the question, to answer the question? Nikos? Would you like to explain further to us what is the computer-generated headline?
Okay, to the level that at least I'm aware from the classic techniques we use, there's something that we call number one, sort of summarization. So you take a big document and then you try to create a set of sentences that will describe the essence of it. And then there is the topic identification or indexing. So if you have such tools, then you can try to get the right kinds of constraints for something that will be a single sentence and we have the length of a headline, and under certain criteria to actually try to automatically create it. These criteria might be coming, for example, from the, either things that have to do with past evaluations of attractiveness of certain words or certain features, or it could be some kind of a measure of clarity. It depends on the each system that you have. But what was a wider question and beyond the technical here?
What
Is
was
it-
the wider question?
Are there computer-generated headlines right now in news stories in the web all the time?
There are entire articles computer-generated nowadays. It's not just about headlines. AI with natural language processing and natural language generation makes, I'm not an expert on the technology, so forgive my explanation, but the technology basically works on statistics and is able to predict, it's been trained on terabytes of previous writings, what is the most likely next word that will appear if I start writing something. And with this basic technology, entire articles are written that can mimic extremely well the quality of human writing. That's not means that we should be scared. It's not as easy as articulate as what you can write as a journalist, obviously. But for most, for example, for context like weather reports or sports live things or financial reports, the technology is already doing an amazing job that allows you not to have to write 20 times the same article because it's the financial report of Apple and then of Amazon and then of Google and then of Microsoft. If you're going to write the same article, you're going to get bored. Luckily, nowadays, a machine can do that for you because it has the power to structure a sentence in a proper way, and you just feeds it the data that you need the article to report about.
In the US, I have the impression it has started being used also for reporting political campaign events and results, right? Which again have become a little standard across states and events.
I mean, sorry, just to finish on that, the technology nowadays is extremely good. So if you look up GPT-2, which is the tool that OpenAI has built, it's quite astonishing, the quality of a story that the machine can completely make up from scratch. There is this funny example of this machine-generated story about a group of researchers in Bolivia, I think, who found unheard before animal, like unicorns, sort of, in an unexplored forest. That's entirely made up, obviously, by a machine. And I know it's a crazy story, obviously, you're not going to believe it, but the way it's written, it's almost perfect.
Does anyone else have another question? Yes. Yes.
I wanted to ask about the artificial intelligence and how the privacy of each user in the internet can be safeguarded. Like we know that nowadays everyone has like a file in the web, but how the privacy of each individual can be safeguarded and not to have like leaks of data for individuals.
Thank you. So she speaks about profiling to you. How systems profile the users and how we protect our data.
Okay, so the very brief, very depressing answer is you cannot guarantee your privacy, I'm afraid. I mean, so there will always be a huge, huge amount of data collection. One of the big paradoxes is actually that the more you try to stay away from the network, it's a bit like, you know, if you are walking down the street and have like a black cloak that's hiding the whole shape of your body, theoretically nobody can recognize you, but you're also known as the person walking around in a black cloak, right? So essentially, the more you try to hide, the more obvious you will become as the person trying to hide. So it's always a weird balance between how much privacy you want to get yourself and how much you want to stand out in your search for privacy. Unfortunately, in general, if you are using large social networks, your data will get harvested. So one of the ways to do it would be, you know, either to create fake profiles and always log in from different web addresses, or just avoid most of the major platforms and use ad blocking on a very, very large scale. But it's incredibly difficult, and the more of those steps you take, the more essentially you stand out from the crowd, unfortunately.
And one small comment in that direction is in the Union we have GDPR right now, right? And I think that as an initiative, GDPR is a pretty nice initiative, and the values that it's actually hinging upon are important values. I also met one of the main officers in Brussels in an IEEE AI ethics event in 2016. He was Polish, I think, right, originally. So the big question, though, with GDPR has to do with the enforcement in the end. Right now, primarily what has been happening is just these small forms where everybody says that I consent to my private data being collected in NBNC, and there are, as far as I know, some processes for being able to audit what data exists in which companies. But in practice, being able to find the right way to check whether what is supposed to be happening under GDPR is indeed happening, and to counterbalance the extra effort required for the companies to be able to comply with GDPR, which might decrease their competitiveness as compared to external entities from other countries, is a basic problem. Also bear in mind that the question is not if private data exists somewhere. In principle, it will exist. For most countries at the level of national security, there's going to be a lot of private data collected, not only for their own citizens, but in many cases for citizens of other countries. Number two, there's a big question regarding locus of data. Where do the data reside? Are they on a server in Europe? Are they connected to a European organization, an A, B, and C? So it's quite a tricky issue. Again, one positive move from Google was that I think that now you can download, again, all the personal information that exists in different parts of Google regarding you. So at least you can know the open part of what is being kept for you.
Do we have any other question? Yes.
Hi. We all agreed, you all agreed that transparency is a big problem with AI, and especially when it comes with unsupervised learning, etc., etc., etc. But you also mentioned open source technologies and stuff like that. But this is in terms of software. What about open source models and open source pre-trained datasets, especially when it comes from Deutsche Welle?
Ruth, would you like to take the question?
I will take it if I understand it. You have to tell me what you really want to know, because I didn't understand it.
Because I am talking about open sourcing your trained datasets, your annotated datasets.
Our code, our source code.
No, not the source code, the annotated data.
The annotated data.
Yes.
Yeah, I think if we would publish automatic content, which we don't do, then we would have to do it. We even think we will have to make it clear if we use assistants, right? So,
Mattia, what do you think? Would media organizations and newsrooms be eager to share their work on models to the rest of the journalism field and the audience?
That's $1 million question, and it's hard. And it's not hard because it's wrong, but because there is a competitiveness in the news industry, which also makes for the quality of striving to be better than the others. So that's an element. In our research, we have asked about this specifically to the newsroom, and to be honest, we have seen an unprecedented openness by news organizations to collaborate on these topics, because they understand that most of them, if they're not the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, they will not have the resources to build technology in-house. They will always be dependent from the technology that the Googles and the Amazons provide them. So there is definitely an eagerness to collaborate, and people are even starting to consider whether is sensible to share their data, and that's sensible for many different reasons that we were touching upon already. So it's not necessarily the good to get there. I am not particularly aware of big collaborations happening already, but we are in a starting point about this field, so I'm honestly very optimistic that this is going to happen, because there is a very clear understanding in newsrooms of why this is valuable, and it's going to be better for everybody to try to collaborate on these topics.
Any other question? I think we have 1 or 2 minutes. Yes.
All right. I would like to start with a comment. I observed that throughout the conversation you used the word audiences, sometimes users, and one aspect of this conversation around how AI and other immersive technologies is how are empowering us as citizens, considered other times as users, audiences, or whatever, but first of all we are citizens. So I would like a comment how we can explore further AI as an empowering opportunity for empowering citizenship and empowering collaborative relationships between citizens and the newsrooms or any other, from technologists to artists.
And please give me just a second. I want to read you something. 2 years ago, I was participating in a prototyping session at the Digital Storytelling Lab of Columbia University. The leading person there is Lance Weiler. So his project was Frankenstein AI, if you ever heard of this project. So he was prototyping for 2 years with people from all over the world, blending AI technologies with very common things, how people bring artifacts to explore their relationships with technology. And the starting point was one excerpt from Mary Shelley's work, Frankenstein. And she says, and that was the starting point for exploration, it is true, we shall be monsters cut off from all the world, but on that account we shall be more attached to one another. And so from exploring this connectiveness, deep connectiveness instead of deep fakes, that is my broader question to you. I would like some responses if possible.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that Nikos and Lucas want to have a word here, so yeah.
Very quick one. So I was at an event at the Center for the Future of Intelligence from the UK. A guy from Cambridge was giving a little while ago, some months ago. And they had this, one of the students that presented had this interesting theory. He said that when it comes to AI, 80% of the narratives that you can find nowadays regarding AI are actually concentrated around 4 poles, 4 conceptual poles. The first one is power. The second one is work. The third one is health and well-being. The fourth one is sociability. And all of them are bipolar in a sense. So they have a utopian side and a dystopian side. Power, we're going to become slaves of the machines, versus the machines are our perfect servants. Work, they're going to take our jobs, versus we're going to be able to do what we really want because all the mundane jobs are going to go there. And then number 3, there is health. Well, we're going to get much better health and longer lives, maybe all the way to, you know, life without end or whatever that would mean, versus they're going to kill us. And number 4, sociability, and this was the interesting part. We're either going to end up, people view machines as a medium that isolates us from other people, or the medium that can become the perfect social mediator that will connect us in the right ways with other people. So the question is whether we're going in one or the other direction. What is your question exactly? I have the impression that people that want to go into a more collective sort of mode of existence will certainly experiment in the other direction too, and there's going to be pragmatics towards that too.
For one or another side, I'm looking from this. The question is about how we blend those, I would say, poles, and how the realities are more complex as human beings related to AI this time. And I think that this conversation is sometimes polarized in one way or the other. We try to figure out very clear-cut answers in which way actually we're doing. So I think I've missed in some cases this more blur space where things happen and are not preconceived, predetermined. So that's why I raised this question, which is still open to exploration.
And we're not sure where we're going to if this is a 4-dimensional space, right?
Yeah. So that
we might need to discuss where we want to go to, though.
Exactly. So what's the question about?
Because people from the production team say that we have to end up. Lucas, do you want to add something on this?
Totally. I am aware that I'm standing between you and coffee. That's risky, so I'm going to be very brief, okay? First of all, I love how you mentioned the idea of users. There's this great joke in computer science that there's only 2 industries that refer to the customers as users, and those are programmers and drug dealers, okay? So, like, I mean, it's already a terrifying thing. And I think that one of the things which we can do is, don't forget, there's all this data feeding our algorithms. So let's actually create a collective social effort and start generating our data. Build Wikipedia pages. There's a beautiful project called OpenStreetMaps, which is like Wikipedia for maps, where we all label our own roads. Label roads, lobby our governments to create data, gather more data, do photos, add them to public registries like Wikimedia Commons. I think that the most empowering act, the most human act, the most anti-bias act that we can do is actually start generating our own data, start doing our own contributions to this, so that it's not just owned by big tech, so that it's owned by all of us, so the algorithms reflect our beautiful diversity as human beings, rather than essentially the views of a much narrower, much wealthier group.
Do you agree that we can end up with this anti-bias call to action?
Amen to that.
Okay, so we did it. Thank you all for being here. Let's get a break.